Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. I wanted to talk about conspiracy theories. Believe it or not, conspiracy theories are one of my favorite topics. Not because I believe them, but because I find them fascinating. And I wonder why other people do believe them. Put it that way. Um, I have known a lot of people, including many of my former students, who accepted some really ridiculous conspiracy theories, like even Pizzagate, the old Pizzagate conspiracy theory, or different versions of the Illuminati conspiracy, like the one proposed by the diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic David Icke, which argues that there is an Illuminati, but the Illuminati is made up of reptoid aliens. Sounds frightening until you realize that the guy is simply out of his mind, which he admits to. He admits to being a paranoid schizophrenic. So I think that should be a reason to simply dismiss what he says. But a lot of people believe in him, and his conspiracy theory that actually most of the leaders of the world, that includes all US presidents, that includes all the popes, on and on and on. They are all actually reptoid aliens. And at will, they can put on a false skin, which makes them look like us. And again, at will, they can remove that false skin, which makes them look like reptiles. um, I don't know why anybody would believe in something like that, but a lot of people do. There are photographs all over the web. Do a Google Images search or a Bing Images search. Now, I haven't done this, so I'm just suggesting it. I don't know what you will find, but I imagine that if you searched for reptoid aliens, you would find alleged photographs of reptoid aliens. Now, the photographs are generally very foggy, hard to make much sense out of, kind of like a Rorschach test, where basically you have to interpret it, read something into it. You have to basically project your own thoughts into the photograph, I guess. Now, why do people believe in conspiracy theories? The Illuminati conspiracies, and there are many of them, the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, all the different conspiracy theories surrounding Donald Trump. I mean, the list is endless. There is even something called the mega conspiracy. And there are people who believe in a mega conspiracy. What does that mean? I will tell you. It means that you believe basically in every single conspiracy theory that you are told. And you find some way to connect them with one another. And so it's a mega conspiracy theory. It's a combination, maybe a compilation of different conspiracy theories all tied into one. One of the most common sayings of conspiracy theorists is just connect the dots. Whenever you hear somebody saying that, be suspicious. Now, the term connect the dots can be used legitimately. It's not always used in the context of conspiracy theories. I mean, there are reasons to connect the dots that are legitimate. For example, in doing a police investigation, you literally do connect the dots in order to find out who is the true perpetrator of a crime. But when a conspiracy theorist says connect the dots, basically what that conspiracy theorist means is to figure out the most ridiculous idea that you can possibly think of and connect them to each other. Again, I don't know why somebody would fall for it, but a lot of people do. There have been studies which have shown that about half of all US citizens believe in some version, and there are many versions, of the Illuminati conspiracy. Now, where did the Illuminati conspiracy come from? And I have actually told this to some Illuminati conspiracy theorists, and they have attacked me for it. And I predicted that they would. Fine. Because basically it came from a person who many Illuminati conspiracy theorists believe are a part of the conspiracy theory. Okay, if that made any sense, I'm not sure if I said it properly, but it will make sense soon enough. It was a Jesuit priest who first came up with the Illuminati conspiracy theory. Why did he come up with it? Well, he hated Freemasons. And so to him, the Freemasons were involved in the secret plan to take over the world, basically establishing that kind of conspiratorial meme of one world order, or some people simply abbreviate it as OWW. And if you are a conspiracy theorist and you see OWW, you will know exactly what that means. But it comes from that Jesuit priest. To many contemporary conspiracy theorists, the Jesuits themselves are a part of the Illuminati conspiracy, meaning they are among the Illuminati. They are among the supposedly illumined ones. Well, I guess. I mean, certainly Jesuits are the scholars among Roman Catholics. Certainly they are the ones who run a lot of Roman Catholic universities. The head of the Jesuits is called the Black Pope, who is often seen somewhat as a competitor to the real Pope. I don't know whether Jesuits would agree with that, but certainly the Black Pope, the head of the Jesuits, does have a lot of power among the Jesuits. And the Jesuits have a lot of influence, intellectual influence, over the Roman Catholic Church. Do they control the church? Obviously not. The Pope controls the church, not the Jesuits. But if you ask an Illuminati conspiracy theorist who attributes the Jesuits to being the Illuminati, that person will tell you, no, the Pope is simply a front man. The people who actually control the Roman Catholic Church are the Jesuits. Now, I have known Jesuits, and the ones I've known have been really nice guys. Now, maybe I'm biased. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I've always had a tremendous love for some unknown reason for Roman Catholicism. I don't know why. Now that has nothing to do with the popes. Nothing to do with the popes. It mostly has to do with the nuns I've met. I love most Roman Catholic nuns I've met. I like certain aspects of Roman Catholic theology. Now, again, I'm not talking about the Vatican City, which possesses this enormous amounts of wealth. I'm not talking about the Pope. I'm not talking about the archbishops or the cardinals. And I'm certainly not talking about the sexual conspiracies, if you want to call them that, or certainly the sexual escapades against children by many Roman Catholic priests. But just the church itself I like. I have similar positive feelings, by the way, toward the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Oriental Orthodox Church. I like the mysticism. I like mysticism, and you can find it in Roman Catholicism, in Eastern Orthodoxy, and in Oriental Orthodoxy. The mysticism really appeals to me. I just like mysticism. So it has nothing really to do with the organizations. It's just the people and how they behave and their interests that for some reason has always appealed to me, even though I am not a Christian. Okay, put that aside. The Illuminati conspiracy theory, although started by this Jesuit priest, was actually popularized in Nazi Germany. How was it popularized? It was popularized by this forged book, counterfeit book, called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. Now, I would only suggest you read it if you have a strong stomach. Otherwise, don't read it. It is really, really disgusting. But maybe it won't be too disgusting if you understand what it is. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion was originally a fictitious book. Had nothing to do with Jews. It was about a plan by some people to take over the world. An anti-Semite got a hold of it and transformed it and turned all those evil people into Jews. So now you have a conspiracy theory of Jews who plan to take over the world. Obviously, as a guy of Jewish ancestry, that is not very pleasant to me. And I've joked sometimes with people, gee, why didn't anybody ever tell me? Why have I been left out of the conspiracy? And I have actually had some Illuminati conspiracy theorists who accept the Jewish version say, in other words, I was joking, but they were taking my joke seriously. So there are many versions of this. The David Icke one, the reptoid aliens, the Freemasonry one, the Jewish one, the Muslim one, which I haven't even mentioned, and many, many more. Basically, what conspiracy theories are, including the Illuminati conspiracy, is that they are simply ways of illustrating hate. So if you hate a particular category of people or a particular group of people, in sociology, we make a distinction between a category and a group, because a category has no structure and a group does have structure, regardless. The idea is that if you are an Illuminati conspiracy theorist, and you believe that there is this kind of generalized conspiratorial activity going on in the world, well, then that's how you will live your life. I would sometimes point out to my students before I retired, obviously, many of whom, unfortunately, as I found, accepted some version of the Illuminati conspiracy theory. And what I would say to them, honestly, I would say it to the whole class. I wouldn't single them out, but I would say it to the class. I would say that people who believe in conspiracy theories, like the Illuminati conspiracy, what they think is that obviously, because things are so disorganized and because things are so messed up, and things often go to the detriment of the poor, that there must be some body of beings, whether human or not, who are in control of the world. And I would say the answer is actually much more simple. The answer is that the world is basically rudderless. And that is the most frightening thing in the world. And I would argue that capitalism has produced a world which is rudderless. Capitalism, based on the idea of greed, that greed is good, as Adam Smith said in Wealth of Nations, and that capitalism, therefore, well, he didn't call it capitalism, but that term was later used, that therefore, because the world is based on greed and people are naturally greedy, kind of an extension of natural law theory, that is a natural law that people are basically greedy, the best type of economic system to have is one based on greed. And that was the argument that Smith put forward, or one of the arguments that Smith put forward, for advocating what later became known as capitalism. But in fact, Smith was wrong. Smith was entirely wrong. The world is really not governed exactly by greed. Now, does that mean that there is no greed in the world? No, of course there is. Capitalism is based largely on greed. But really, what runs the world is the fact that there is nobody in charge. I'll give you one example. There is a book written by Lawrence Peter called The Peter Principle. Like many successful authors, and the book The Peter Principle became a bestseller. You can still buy it, or you can find it online. Go to archive.org, look up The Peter Principle, or look up Lawrence Peter, and you'll find that book and its many sequels. So, because that book was successful, he did write many sequels to it, which is what authors often do. The basic idea, however, is simple. You don't need to read the other books. The other books are simply repetitions of the original book with new examples. Like one of the books is called Beyond the Peter Principle. Well, it's not beyond the Peter Principle. It's simply a restatement of the Peter Principle with new illustrations. But that aside, here is the statement that Lawrence Peter made. People are promoted to their position of maximum incompetence. Now, what does that mean? It's a pretty good description of capitalism, first of all. But what does that basically mean? Well, what Peter said is that say you have a job. Say you are a factory worker. You work on an assembly line, and there's a foreman, or I guess a forewoman. I don't know of a neutral term for foreman. Whenever the foreman is busy or out sick or something, this one person, male or female, will fill in and become the temporary foreman or forewoman. And it turns out that this particular person actually does a better job than the regular foreman. Now, that is not lost on middle-level management. They see that. Now, they're not going to fire the actual foreman because the foreman is okay. He doesn't do a bad job. There's really no reason to fire him. He's not incompetent. But this other person actually does a better job. Okay. So the foreman is older than this assembly line worker. So the foreman reaches the age where he or she is eligible for Social Security and Medicare, much as I was about a year ago. And so the foreman or forewoman retires. Then middle-level management thinks, well, we need to find a new person to do that job. And right away, they think of that person who fills in whenever the foreman is unavailable, whenever the forewoman is unavailable. They think, well, we don't have to do a search. We already know who would be a good person to replace the old foreman or forewoman. And so they approach this person and say, hey, we've noticed how good you are, even how much better you are than the old retired foreman. We would like to offer you the job of being the foreman. And say, just for the sake of discussion, that would mean an extreme increase in salary. Let's say the person's salary would double. I have no idea how those things work, so maybe what I'm saying is incorrect, but for the sake of discussion, let's say that this person's salary would double. Now, that is a really easy decision for this person because the person liked working as the temporary foreman or forewoman. So the person, without thinking, without even consulting her or his spouse, says, of course, yeah, I want the job, of course. And predictably, this new foreman or forewoman does a better job than the previous one and is very well liked by people, goes to help people when they need help. It's just a very nice person, just generally well liked by the other workers. And if you know anything about factory work, which I don't, to be honest, because I've never worked in a factory, but if you happen to know anything about factory work, which I only know secondhand, it's very common that workers will dislike the foreman or forewoman and think that the person is incompetent. But that's not true here. In this case, people are really happy with how this person is doing. A couple of years go by. A job opens up in middle management. That would mean that the person would basically have an office job. He's sitting in an office most or all of the day and have an administrative assistant, what used to be called a secretary when I was a kid, working on the outside. But this manager, this middle-level manager, would be by himself or herself. And they think, well, here we have this foreman or forewoman who was doing a splendid job, a really bang-up job. Why don't we offer this person the job of being the middle-level manager? So they offer it to the person. Person says, well, can I have a couple of days to think about it? And they say, of course, you can have a week. So this person goes home, discusses it with her or his spouse. And the person says, well, you know, I like working with other people. I like being on the floor. I like being with people on the assembly line that I can help. The idea of sitting in an office the whole day, having an administrative assistant on the outside, is not very appealing to me. But the person's spouse says, well, I can understand that, but we could certainly use the money, and your salary would once again double. So it seems reasonable that you would take the job. So the person thinks more, has a lot of doubt about it, as you might expect, but ultimately agrees with her or his spouse and decides to take the job. Goes back to the other people, whoever they are, and says, my spouse and I have decided that I should take the job. Okay. And they're very happy. They think they've gotten a really good person for the job. Little do they know. Okay. The person has the job. Now, this new middle-level manager is not awful. He doesn't do a horrible job, but he or she does only a mediocre job and is not very happy. And it's obvious to everyone in the company that this person does not really like what she or he is doing. But the person is not doing a bad enough job to be fired. So the person just stays there, unhappy, but doing a mediocre but passable job. In other words, the person has risen to her or his level of maximum incompetence. See, that's the idea. So in other words, if you have a company or a corporation or a university or a college, whatever, and if Lawrence Peter is right, which a lot of people in my field think that he was, that's not really my field. That field is called the sociology of work or industrial sociology, which is not my field. My field was the sociology of religion and social theory. But so I really don't want to comment on that, on how good or bad that particular idea is. But I know a lot of people who work in those specializations who say that it's amazing that this guy, Lawrence Peter, who had no training in sociology, came up with this magnificent idea about why companies, why corporations are often so inefficient. let's take that back to the Illuminati conspiracy. Again, we have the situation where basically you have a lot of people working in companies who are not really qualified or not the best qualified people for their jobs. So again, we come back to this notion of a company, a university, a college, whatever, running rudderless. There is literally no one in charge. If you don't know any better, you might assume it is a conspiracy. Maybe a conspiracy against you, a conspiracy against workers. They are trying to hurt me. They are looking out for their own good. They don't care about me. It's the Illuminati, maybe, in some extreme cases. So, a simple case of incompetence where a company is, or whatever, is functioning rudderless. In other words, it's the exact opposite of the kind of extreme authoritarianism that is assumed by proponents of the Illuminati conspiracy theory, is accepted, and the result is that people end up believing in total nonsense. But a lot of people believe it. Look at what happened with the Pizzagate conspiracy, where the idea was that Hillary Clinton was in charge of some, I don't know what it was, some child sex, I don't know what it was, that was run by Hillary Clinton in the basement of a pizzeria. Now, I like pizzerias, and it's hard to imagine that kind of thing in the basements of one. But if you don't know any better, especially if you are a redneck, which means that most likely you are not very well educated, most likely you have a large collection of guns, most likely you like to go hunting and fishing, and most likely you are very gullible, because people who do not have that much education tend to be extremely gullible. People who only graduate from high school are more gullible than people who graduate from college. People who did not graduate from high school are generally more gullible than people who did graduate from high school. And you can take it all the way on up to the doctoral level. People with a doctorate, like me, tend not to be very gullible. And believe me, I am not. I am a skeptic. People tell me all these things, and I listen to them. I'm an empiricist. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. What I think is, let me find the evidence. What evidence exists to support this? That's the way that I look at the world. And it's not just me. Most people in academia are empiricists, meaning we rely upon sensory observation, direct sensory observation. Well, direct whenever possible. If you're a historian, typically you can't rely upon direct sensory observation, since the events you're talking about happens before, maybe before your lifetime, maybe thousands of years ago, whatever. So you're not really relying upon empiricism, but the ultimate goal in academia is to get as close as you can to the events on the ground. If it's not direct observation, you want to find somebody who did directly observe the events and report on those. But you don't simply accept the word of somebody, a conspiracy theorist, for example, who claims that something is true, like the lizard people, or that the look. I had a friend. Now, admittedly, he was a paranoid schizophrenic, and I won't mention his name, because I don't think it's appropriate to mention his name, for a variety of reasons. But he believed that the Earth, well, let me rephrase that. The under the Earth, or like in the Middle Earth, I guess using a kind of Tolkien metaphor. In the Middle Earth, there was a secret civilization. Okay, a secret civilization. Now, if you believe something like that, I guess being a paranoid schizophrenic would be a good explanation for it. But a lot of people believe in those kinds of things, and they're not paranoid schizophrenics. They're simply conspiracy theorists. And as a result, they are very gullible, which means they're very suggestible, which means that they're very hypnotic. They're very susceptible to a kind of hypnotic influence. They believe what they are told. So they do exactly the opposite of what they claim. Like, for example, many conspiracy theorists will accuse people who reject their conspiracy theories of being sheep. You might have heard that before. But actually, they are the ones who are following sheep, because they are accepting unknowing, unthinking people or beings, like sheep maybe, without any evidence for it. And so if you do that, if you're willing to accept something like that with literally no evidence, it doesn't necessarily mean you're stupid. I would not call somebody stupid. A person could actually be on the Stanford Binet IQ test a genius, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? I'm not going to judge that. But it means, at the very least, that the person is an ignoramus. The person is not well educated. And again, the less education you have, the more likely you are to believe in these kinds of really, really silly, for lack of a better term, silly is good, I guess, conspiracy theories. I remember this one conspiracy theory that struck me as really, really strange. And it was about this Admiral Byrd. Now, I had never heard of Admiral Byrd, but apparently there was an Admiral Byrd that was involved in World War II. And the story was, and I have a copy of the book in PDF form somewhere, that Admiral Byrd had somehow stumbled in taking a trip to Antarctica. I mean, why would he take a trip to Antarctica? I have no idea, but that's the story. Okay. So he took a trip to Antarctica and he found a hole in the earth. And he decided, what the heck? Well, obviously, I'm putting words into it, trying to make it sound more silly than it was. It's silly enough without my putting words into it. But he found a hole in the earth and he went down into the hole. There, he met these advanced beings, advanced, technologically advanced beings living in the center of the earth, who taught him all these things. What people who believe in that conspiracy theory argue is that when he got out of the earth, of the center of the earth, I should say. He reported this to other people in the military and was told, I guess ordered, to keep quiet about it, which he did. But that somehow his diary, you wouldn't think that would happen, but it did, according to the story, leaked out. And it's all over the place. So now anybody can go and read Admiral Byrd's diary. Now, did this happen? Well, I mean, the question itself is silly. I mean, the fact that anybody would even give any consideration to something like that is nonsensical. Why would somebody believe in that? I literally don't understand it. It just sounds so weird. I used to think when I was a kid, and I was into the paranormal. I admit that when I was like between say 10 and 13, roughly. And I was also into UFOs. I believed strongly in UFOs. Now, do I have any idea whether there are or are not UFOs? No, but I don't care. It's not something that's in my mind anymore. I just could care less. I don't accept it. I don't reject it. I just don't care. But I believed in all these things. I was interested in holding seances. I used a pendulum to predict the future. I tried to do astral projection, although it never worked for me. I was always unsuccessful. In other words, I was not a good astral projectionist. And other things too. There are a variety of psychic and other kinds of things that I tried to do. And I thought, I guess because I thought the paranormal was out of sync with the way most people thought, that most people who believed in paranormal subjects, which is a general term that would include all the things I mentioned and more, that most people who believe in the paranormal were people on the left. I was on the left. I was a commie. I became a commie when I was 12. So shortly after, I developed this interest in the paranormal. I was wrong. I was really, really wrong. How did I find this out? I'm not going to mention the guy's name. He's dead. But his ex-late wife is still alive. And if she comes across this, I don't want her to hear this man's name. Not appropriate. I can talk about the story without mentioning his name. But regardless, he was a really unusual man. One of the strangest people I have ever known in my entire life. He claimed to me personally, actually said it to me, but many others as well, at his home, people who visited his home for meetings, that he developed something that he called the napkin technique. The napkin technique was supposedly a method of predicting earthquakes. And it was based, which I still don't understand, on the distance between Shiraz, Iran, and Tehran, Iran. I don't know why he picked those two cities. No idea, but he did. And he claimed that based upon some deduction from the distance between those two cities, and he would never tell anybody what it was because it was secret. It was a secret conspiratorial thing or something. I tried to get him to tell me. I said, Rob, look, why not tell me? Or if your napkin technique really works that well. And I was a kid, I was like 15 years old at the time. So I thought, well, look, but even then it came to me, I thought, well, if this thing works, shouldn't you write a book on it? Shouldn't you tell other people about it? And he said, no, because they won't believe me. And I said, well, if you produce evidence, concrete empirical evidence, and believe it or not, I knew what empirical meant at 15 years old. If you produce concrete empirical evidence for your napkin technique, then people will have to take notice. How can they? How can they not? If they don't, you can publish it in a journal or a magazine, and people will read about it. So one way or another, people will find out about your napkin technique, and that might help save lives. You know, people can predict earthquakes. They know that an earthquake is coming to a particular place. They can know in advance, well, gee whiz, we better move someplace else. I mean, seismographs are good, but he claimed that his napkin technique was much better than seismographs. Well, do I think that he actually developed a napkin technique? No. I think he made the whole thing up. He was an attention seeker. He was an attention seeker. He never even showed anyone an example of his napkins. He never showed it. I said, well, let me see one. He wouldn't. He said, no, it's I don't want anybody to know how it works. And I said, well, how will I know if it works by just looking at it? You know, I'm not a mathematician. I'm a kid. But he wouldn't show it to me. So that told me right then and there. And I knew immediately that he was lying. He made the whole thing up. One time, I was at his home. He was a friend. He was a friend, or I thought he was a friend. And I made the statement, which is something I still believe in till this day, that borders should be eliminated, meaning people should be free to cross over borders without passports and without visas. I said that doesn't mean that countries would need to be eliminated, but you know, I mean, well, there was no EU at the time. I guess I was thinking of something like the EU. You know, in other words, there still are countries in Europe. Countries have not gone away, but countries that are members of the EU, I mean, you just cross over. And in fact, in many cases in the EU, your next door neighbor, literally your next door neighbor, might live in another country, and it literally makes no difference. So long before there was an EU, I thought that was a really good idea. Maybe I should have proposed that to somebody. Maybe I could have made some money on it, but most likely not. But it was something I thought was good. I said it to this guy whose name I won't mention. I hope I have not used his name or his first name in this podcast. But his first name, using his first name, I guess wouldn't be too bad. But I will not use it, or I'll try not to use it. He screamed his head off at me. Screamed his head off at me. I mean, I was in total shock. I thought he would agree with me. I did. I assumed that because he believed in all this paranormal stuff, like I used to, or I was kind of going out of it by that time, but I used to. that he would agree with me. But he didn't. He really did not. I found out then and there that he was on the far right, and I don't use that term that I don't use that term um, without caution. Some people will throw out the term far right much too loosely. I don't do that. I make distinctions. So when I say the far right, I mean the far right. This guy was on the far right, meaning, well, from subsequent conversations with him, I realized that his basic views were fascist. Not neo-Nazi, but fascist. He was a fascist. But I had never noticed that before. I guess because we hadn't gotten into this discussion. My response to him when he yelled at me was to call him a wild boar. What else? I couldn't think of anything else. So I called him a wild boar. What else? 15 years old. I probably could do better now. He kicked me out of his home. A couple of years later, we had a kind of, I guess, reconciliation of sorts. We never really were friends again. I mean, we were friends, but I would still occasionally go over to his home and listen to his weird presentations, including on the version of astrology that he had developed, which was not really astrology, but it was some kind of modification of astrology that he formulated. And I would listen to this stuff. And I realized from that point on that most people who believe in the paranormal are on the far right. In many cases, fascists. For example, and I know I'm dragging this on for a long time, and I apologize for that. The traditionalist school of esotericism, founded by Guénon and Chouon. There was one particular member of the traditionalist school of esotericism. He was an Italian guy named Julius, which looks like Julius, but Italian it's Julius Evola. And he actually was a member of the Italian fascist party. He was a member of it. He was a fascist. He was also a member of the traditionalist school. Now, does that mean that all people in the traditionalist school are fascists? I would say half and half. Not to the extent that Evola was, but there's a kind of fascist component to traditionalism. If you understand what it is, I would suggest look up the traditionalist school. Go to Google, put traditionalist school in quotes, and you'll find out all about it. Or maybe traditionalist esotericism. You'll probably find something with that category too. What they argue is that there has been an unerring line of divine revelation throughout the millennia, and that only certain branches of religions are continuations of that line. So, for example, they would say that within Islam, it is tasawwuf, which is Sufism. I say tasawwuf because I can barely read Arabic. I study Arabic and Persian. So I try to I try to throw in as many Arabic words as I can. But what they would say is tasawwuf, but not necessarily all of tasawwuf or Sufism. Only certain tariqas or orders or schools or paths, which is literally what the word tasawwuf means, is path, uh, of uh, of Sufism are legitimate. And so if you follow a correct version of tasawwuf, then you are a part of that unerring eternal tradition. Similarly, within Christianity, they would say Eastern Orthodoxy. Now, I don't know why they don't say Oriental Orthodoxy, because that's even more mystical than Eastern. All I can think of is that Guénon and Chouon were not familiar with Oriental Orthodoxy. I don't know why else, but regardless, they said Eastern Orthodoxy. And again, similar kinds of things. Like, for example, with Buddhism. With Buddhism, they pick the various tantric forms of Buddhism. Same thing with Hinduism, the various tantric forms of Hinduism. So they pick these esoteric, or in some cases, literally occult forms of religions as the continuation of this eternal tradition of truth, like a thread of truth that has existed throughout the ages. And so, if you happen to be a member of one of those schools of thought, one of those true traditions, meaning branches of a greater tradition which has the true esoteric knowledge in it, then you are special. You are special. That is really, really fascist. That is, if you know anything about fascism, that is really, really fascist, because they're claiming that it's not good enough to be a Jew, for example. One has to be a Hasidic Jew. It's not good enough to be a Buddhist. One has to be a tantric Buddhist or a tantric Hindu. It's not good enough to be a Christian. One has to be an Eastern Orthodox Christian. It's not good enough to be a Muslim. One has to be a Sufi Muslim, or maybe a member of only certain branches of Sufi Islam. Whatever. That is very fascist, because it's putting everyone else out as outsiders, which is what fascism does. It others people. It turns people, except for the privileged few, into the other. It marginalizes them. Or, to use the term of Antonio Gramsci, it turns them into the subaltern. Okay, now, is the traditionalist movement that large? Not really. It's large enough. It is an enemy of the theosophical movement started by Helena Blavatsky, because it sees theosophy as being a hybrid. It argues that maybe that's true, but it argues that what Blavatsky did, or as she's commonly called in the movement, HPB, Helena P. Blavatsky, that what she did is she took bits and pieces of different religions and combine them into theosophy. So somebody in the traditionalist school would say that's artificial. So they reject completely theosophy, much as they reject the third way of Gurdjieff. So in other words, they have a very narrow view of what is the tradition. Okay, so it's very conspiratorial. We're still talking about conspiracies because it's saying that unless you belong to these particular branches of a religious tradition, you are deprived of inner or esoteric or paranormal knowledge or arcane knowledge. You are an outsider. And most people, they would say, are outsiders. So you have to be, and they actually use the term initiate. You have to be an initiate. Now, have I known people who were traditionalists? Yes. 2 people. I've known 2 people who were initiates. One face to face, and I won't mention his name, and the other by email. The one face to face, he's dead, but again, I don't want to give him a bad name because honestly, I liked him. I don't think he was that fascist, but he accepted elements of traditionalism anyway, but in his own way. So I would not exactly call him personally a fascist, although he certainly borrowed from a fascist way of thinking. So generally, I would say that the paranormal, contrary to what I originally believed, is a right-wing phenomenon, just as conspiracy theories, like the Illuminati conspiracy, are right-wing phenomena. And most people who believe, not everyone, but most people who believe in conspiracy theories, like the Illuminati conspiracy, the Pizzagate conspiracy, whatever one, pick your conspiracy. The mega conspiracy tend to be on the far right. And it's because of their gullibility. And what else can you say? I mean, I think astrology also is a kind of conspiracy theory. You have to learn how to do charts. You have to learn it. Numerology, palmistry, crystal gazing, also called scrying, telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, remote viewing. It requires special inside knowledge. Only the few have it. If you are not among the few, then you don't have that knowledge. You are cut off from it. So, again, the point of this podcast, this really long podcast, and I apologize for its length. I don't even know how long it's been. I'll see afterwards. I haven't been watching the clock, but regardless, the purpose of this podcast was to discuss conspiracy theories in a very broad sense. Most people would not consider many of the things that I talked about to be conspiracy theories, like the paranormal, for example, like the traditionalist school. I would, as a sociologist of religion, which is my field, I would consider all of those things to be conspiracy theories. And conspiracy theorizing is very, very dangerous. If you are aware of that incident connected with the Pizzagate conspiracy, the attempted murder connected with it, then you know what I mean. And there have been a lot of conspiracy theories or theorists. For example, people in the sovereign citizen movement. There's another one. People who believe that you can choose between being an actual citizen and a sovereign citizen, which means you can ignore laws and be your own boss. There's no such thing. But there have been shootouts between sovereign citizens and police officers, and some police officers have been killed by sovereign citizens. That's another conspiracy theory, a right-wing conspiracy theory. Now, are there some left-wing conspiracies? Not what I would call left-wing. Not what I would call left-wing, which is far left, but central left, borderline left, progressive. Yeah, there are some in there. Maybe there are some far left conspiracy theories. In fact, I just thought of one, but they're not that plentiful. The one I'm thinking of is the is that branch of Trotskyism, which claims that that somehow that Trotsky's idea of communist internationalism is actually communist interplanetaryism or something. That basically we have to have relationships with people around from other, I guess, star worlds. So, okay, there are some. But Trotskyists are kind of weird often anyway. And I say that as somebody who has dabbled in Trotskyism, although I don't really think I was ever a true Trotskyist. I certainly dabbled in it, to my regret. I have nothing against Lev Trotsky, personally. I don't have anything against anyone. I'm interested in ideas. I'm not interested in condemning people. Even Julius Evola, whose ideas I despise, I have no desire to condemn Julius Evola either. So that's about it. That's my summation of conspiracy theories viewed as in a much broader way than most people view them, and an attempt to argue that conspiracy theories generally are right-wing phenomena. Always? No, as I said, not always. But in the vast majority of cases, I have studied conspiracy theories as a sociologist of religion. I consider the study of conspiracy theories to be a part of the sociology of religion. So I've studied a lot of them, and I can only think of that one that I just mentioned, that Trotskyist one, that is far left, arguably far left. I don't know what to make of it. It's just a bunch of crazy people who believe in this, and it's tiny. Maybe there are only 3 of them around for all I know. I have no idea. But they show up on the web a lot. They have their own website. So regardless, most conspiracy theories are right-wing. So what conspiracy theories, I think, can tell us is about the problems in the first world. Because conspiracy theories generally exist in the first world. The first world right wing. Donald Trump believes in a lot of them. I mean, his MAGA movement, people believe in a lot of them. I mean, you don't have to go far to find them on the right. Maybe your neighbor believes them. So generally, where you find a lot of conspiracy theories is in the first world. Does that mean that there are none in the third world? No, of course not. Of course not. To say that would be triumphalistic, meaning I'd be making a claim that somehow the first world is unjustifiably worse than the third world without evidence. I would never make a claim like that without evidence. And I am aware of conspiracy theories in the third world. I have studied some of them, but certainly they are not as plentiful as the ones that exist very openly in the first world. So I think that, and you can agree or disagree with me. Obviously, you can. I really don't even need to say that, but I do I do anyway for some odd reason. Hopefully, when the first world is taken out of power by whatever means it happens, and I'm not a prophet or a prognosticator, I can't predict the future, but I can examine the dialectic. I am a dialectical materialist and a historical materialist, and so I can examine the dialectic. And when I look at the dialectic, I see the dialectic increasing very rapidly, and literally, as I speak, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in the US, wherever, tearing down the first world. Is it tearing down the third world too? To an extent. To an extent, it's one world, one planet, but not as much, nowhere near as much. And so my only hope is that when the first world is gone, which I think is only a matter of time, it will be gone soon. I take solace in that. Maybe that's kind of a weird thing to say because I live in the first world, but I don't care. I want to see the first world replaced by the third world. And hopefully, once that happens, the third world can lead us to communism or socialism. For now, as usual, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.